Well, folks, welcome back to the Dare to Be Great, Dare to Be You podcast. My name is Sean Langwell, and I am your host. And if you've been following the show or you're new to the show, I've had some pretty remarkable guests on here over the last 2.5 years, and I started it on a whim. And, in between, I'm reading some things from the books that I've done because people don't always read, but they like to listen and watch episodes on YouTube or listen to a podcast. So the purpose of this show, if you like honest, vulnerable, and real stories about what it takes to not only become great, but self-confident and bold enough to be yourself, then this show is for you. Each of my guests started out as ordinary people like you and me, but have accomplished extraordinary things in their lives to be considered great masters or experts at what they have been called to do. Join me each episode for inspiring, encouraging, and meaningful conversations with people, diverse people from all walks of life and industry. Leaders and brave individuals who offer unique insights into the fields of arts, entertainment, business, finance, technology, healthcare, sports, psychology, recovery, self-improvement, personal growth, and so much more. Whether you are in the same fields as my guest or not, I guarantee you will walk away from each episode feeling better about yourself and inspired to take the next bold step toward your own goals and aspirations. Your life will improve if you dare to be great and dare to be you. And folks, I'm going to start the show before I dive into this gentleman's bio with those out there who think that they need the golden ticket. Okay. This guest that I have is a New York Times bestselling author. He's out there doing it. He's been in the corporate arena, and I'm going to read his bio in a second. But for those who don't dare to dream and actually follow through and think that they have to have all their ducks lined up, you don't. And we're going to get into this conversation with Kyle McDowell. And Kyle's a former Fortune 10 executive turned inspirational speaker, a best-selling author and leadership coach. He's on a quest to create cultures of excellence and reignite leaders' passion and purpose. With nearly three decades of experience leading tens of thousands of employees at some of America's biggest firms, McDowell's philosophy is rooted in his trademark principles, the 10 W's. While today's workforce is plagued with uncertainty and apathy, his strategy is simple. Begin with we. His Wall Street Journal and USA Today bestseller, Begin with We, expresses the root causes of business dysfunction, offering a remedy through the 10 We's framework. Welcome, Kyle.
Hey man, Sean, great to be with you today. Thank you.
You too. And that's a mouthful. And I just want to jump into, I read the backstory here and it's kind of fun because I got a little sick and tired of being sick and tired and not hitting my goals. And I wrote it on literally on a post-it note, those words, 10 seconds of boldness. And it sounds like you had a little bit of an epiphany when you were in a hotel room. So let's start with that origin story and we'll see where this goes.
Yeah, that's the right word too. And I think it's the single biggest epiphany of turned out of my life. And I thought at first it was just a work professional type thing, but it's transcended work in ways that I never anticipated. And so, you shared a bit of my background, and I think from the outside looking in, it's I had a career. I'm still having a career that I was able to check a lot of boxes.
Hmm.
Early on in my kind of my path, if you will, I set some benchmarks for myself, and frankly, they were vanity metrics, like or measurements, like the sexy title, the cool corner office. I wanted to lead big organizations, and I think like so many of us, well, all of us, frankly, we all enter the workplace regardless of whatever field it is. We want to make an impact. We want to find fulfillment. We want to do big things, and I was no different. I carried a lot of those energies a lot of that energy through my first 2 decades, and found myself climbing the corporate ladder in ways that I think even surprised me at a very young age. I was leading hundreds of employees, and then ultimately, before I stepped away to write my book, I was leading 30,000 employees in my last two roles, multi-billion dollar P&Ls, organizations with operations around the world. And I will tell you, Sean, as I reached around year 20 of my career, the only thing that matched those the ladder that I was climbing, each rung as I got higher, was the level of apathy that I started to feel.
Mm. In
Man,
yourself or in
it's
the
something.
organization as a whole?
Say that again.
In yourself, the apathy as an organization or in yourself?
Well, in those days, there wasn't a lot of separation between the two. My
Okay.
my my corporate life was my identity,
Sure.
and like so many of us, we allow work to play kind of an outsized role in who we are in all settings, and I certainly fell victim to that. But the apathy was most strongest around the environments in which I was working. And man, what a hell of a gut punch to wake up one day and loathe the environments that you are and were responsible for creating. I really didn't have anywhere else to look except myself.
Yeah.
And I got to this point where I was sick and tired of being sick and tired, as you said. And I made the decision to step away from the role I was in at the time. And I don't want to come across naive or Pollyannish. I mean, I was in a fortunate position where I was able to step away. I wasn't in a place where I could retire, but I knew I
Sure.
had a couple of bucks in the bank and I could step away for, I don't know, a few weeks, maybe a couple of months. And I was out of work for about 2 weeks and I got a phone call asking from a headhunter, wondering if I would have any interest in joining a firm that would call for me to lead about 15,000 people. It's a $7 billion program or portfolio. And it was through the conversations and the interviews, I sensed that there was an opportunity for me to lead differently. I didn't know what that meant yet. I just knew that if I wanted to feel differently about what I was doing, I had to do something different. And it's probably worth mentioning at this point, I was on the doorstep of a divorce that ultimately
Hmm.
happened. I was not in very good physical shape, was really not a healthy guy. And I wasn't a very happy person. I wasn't a
Sure.
fun person to be around. But this interview process kind of opened my eyes to what I was searching for. And I didn't know what exactly that was. I just had this suspicion there was a better way. And that was the question that kept playing through my mind over and over again throughout that process was, is there a better way? Or is everyone supposed to just hate their job, like suffer from the Sunday scaries, and we just get on this hamster wheel and never get off until something bad happens or we're fortunate enough to retire? So I took the role and I was probably 60 days into the job and I requested the top 40 or 50 leaders of my newly inherited organization to come together in one of our office locations. It was in Lawrence, Kansas. And it was that evening where the epiphany really showed up. And so as I played through some thoughts on what I was going to share the next morning with this group of leaders, the classic Kyle approach would have been to kind of flaunt my impressive MBA or the work that I had done in the past and the numbers of people that I had led and the size of the organizations, all arrogant kind of vanity driven statements. And it occurred to me that if that's what the old Kyle would have done, the old results, the ones that I've been living with for the last 2 decades, or how I felt, especially the last maybe handful of years, they were going to be the same. But if I wanted to feel differently, I had to change. I had to change my approach. And not knowing what that meant, I just started to replay scenarios through my brain of the last 2 decades of bosses who left me feeling less than whole. They left me feeling like I was disposable or just kind of a number, a means to an end. And then I juxtapose those experiences with the handful of bosses who really inspired me. Maybe they saw things in me that I didn't see in myself. They gave me opportunities that maybe I wasn't quite ready for, but gave me just enough rope to kind of expand and grow. And through each of those scenarios, man, I was like, well, that's who we want to be. We're going to operate
Hmm.
like that. Every response to every scenario that played through my brain was it started with the word we. And I thought, well, I can either tell this group of leaders who I am, what I represent, and what I can do for them, or I can take a completely different approach and lean into their experience, their knowledge, their expertise, and put all of that energy that I have historically spent on kind of pumping myself up and shining a light on myself, and I would take that energy and shine it on them. I thought the results would be there, but I had this hunch that I would form connections and bonds and have a real impact that would outlast my tenure. And dude, it was a number of months that went by, and we started to see really dramatic improvement in KPIs. Nearly every measurable reached an all-time high. But what was more impressive or kind of profound to me was watching bosses transition to real leaders, people that actually give a shit
Mm.
about the person to their left and their right, the person they lead, the group of people they lead. And that organization is still living with these 10 We's as their kind of cultural DNA. They have the 10 We Awards. They've made it their own identity. And I kind of thought to myself, this might be a bigger calling. And it was that group of leaders who inspired me and pushed me to write my first book, Begin with We. And that's what fuels everything I do today is working with organizations and leaders to install a kind of a set of behavioral expectations instead of these lofty mission statements and values on a wall. Like we need observable behaviors that we can lean back into in good times and bad. And that's where I focus all my work on today.
So let me interject there, and that's awesome because you trust your gut. I call it trusting your gut. There's some people out there that say you can't trust your heart or your gut. And my hat's off to them. If they don't want to trust their heart or their gut, then
Mm,
that's what they're going to believe. And I'm not going to get into a neuroscience argument here because
mm.
we know too much about. But you followed through with something, and what was the epiphany that had you take what you had been in the corporate arena, responsible. And I've been there too. And I share that with you so much because, I was poor growing up and all I wanted was to be rich. I read Richie Rich comic
Likewise.
books as a kid for crying out loud. I had this dream of being, Tony Robbins was coming up. That's what I wanted to be. I was 17, he's 22 doing this.
Mm,
At 17, I knew that, but I got lured into this ego-driven, greed-driven, not we-driven type of environment. And I hear underneath what you're saying that you're at the front lines and you were in the middle of making that shift. The question I have is, what are the tangibles? And this is for the leaders out there to listen to this podcast if they happen to listen to it. What were the tangible KPIs that you were able to show some measurable attribution of increase in either numbers of sales, profit margins, employee morale, whatever those metrics happen to be? Give us a little bit of the tangibles there because as we both know, they want tangibles, right?
right. Yeah. Across the board. So the first thought or quantified metric were our employee engagement scores. So
Okay.
annually we would do surveys to say, my leader is committed to my growth and my development, or this is a great place to work because it supports my ambitions, things like that. So we saw uptick in nearly every measurable on the engagement scores. But in terms of operational KPIs, attendance of all things was one of the ones that we saw a big uptick. People were more willing to show up and come to work. Um, Quality scores. So this was a customer service environment. It was managing or leading the enrollment centers for 1-800 Medicare and for the Affordable Care Act. So really, really purpose-driven work. Our quality scores from an external third-party validation went up from the interactions on the phones that we had with our consumers and beneficiaries. Quality scores went up there as well. Something very, very important called handle time, how long you take to get a problem resolved, started to improve as well. Um, in that world, in the call center world, there is no shortage of metrics, and I'm not exaggerating when I tell you nearly every single one went to all-time highs over the subsequent 4 to 6 months, and then they were maintained for many many years. At least when I left, they were still at all-time highs.
Yeah, and I didn't ask that question to put you on the spot, but really because you and I, when we're out there talking to business leaders, they always go to the bottom line. And
Yeah.
I've been in sales and advertising for 35 years, and that's where a lot of people go. I don't know if you've ever been there, but I've been in calls where somebody says, "What's the bottom line?" And I'm like,
Right. What's the ROI?
"What's the ROI?" Well, what are you doing now to help your? I mean, we can go all that. This isn't a sales conversation here, but the importance is what you just talked about. The research out there is really about quality of life for the people that supposedly are the most valuable resource for a particular company to
Mhm.
drive the engine that serves the customers, that keeps this whole thing going. And when you move from a me to we, if I understand you correctly, you're flipping that a little bit. It's not so much quarterly bottom line profits and profit margins, which are a tangible, necessary, viable number to track. It's the root of that. What helps feed this? Is that a fair assessment?
100% correct, Sean. And it's a nuanced shift with a massive outcome. And the shift is this: if you focus on the results, and that was me for 2 decades, to bang my fist on the desk, results at all costs, didn't really care how we got there as long as we hit the bogey. You will deliver results. The
Sure.
question is how sustainable is it? And
Hmm.
at what cost are you delivering those results? And that's manifested in, as you know, in any number of ways: turnover, employee burnout, all kinds of things. Or you can choose to exert that same level of energy into the people doing the work, and the results will come, but they come with the added benefit of real connection. And that's real. And I've grown to this place now, man, where I just so firmly believe that if you are in a position of authority, let's call it, so you're a boss, that means by definition you have the opportunity to have an impact on someone that is
Mhm.
far greater reaching than the role they're in today. And that includes
Absolutely.
helping someone on their next step, whatever it is. If they want to leave the organization and go do something else because it helps them, it helps their family, it's the right step on their path. I think it's not just a boss's obligation. I think it's a human obligation. And this just in, man, when we invest that level of energy and most of all care into those around us, they don't work less hard.
No.
They don't assume less ownership. And this is true, I think, of every single human on the planet. When we recognize that someone is investing in us, and I don't mean monetarily, I mean energy, I mean care. I mean, they're trying to inspire and compel people and want to leave people better than they found them and leave places better than they found them. The profound result that comes is far beyond any level of fulfillment that any KPI will deliver, but they just happen to come as well.
Sure. And that's why I asked the question. You're a super smart guy, and I mean, if you're ever out in California, let's sit down and go have lunch together because we're talking the same language. You're just in a
Amen.
different lens from where you were on in the leadership circle. I've been in the engine driving sales circle, but I've been in the corporate arena and I've seen it from a distance trying to help my job. And the companies that I have thrived in have been exactly what you're describing. And I'm sure that there's others who are listening to this. Not all bosses are tyrants, not all bosses are just bottom line, but the companies that I have gravitated towards that I've stayed in long term have always been with a support group of leaders who understand and are willing to listen to their employees and not just say, like the old parent, you know, saying, do as I do, do as I say, not as I do type of thing. And when this the buzzword, let's change gears just briefly, and I do want you to go through the 10 W's so we don't forget that. But there's so much talk in the personal growth space, in writing workshops, in business and corporate America about the need for collaboration. And I've got a personal pet peeve when people start throwing buzzwords out there that have no meat and teeth when it's one thing to say it, but if you're not willing to move out of your marketing silo or your HR silo or your sales silo or your managerial silo or your parent silo or whatever the 101 silos that are that we have, we're missing the opportunity to create the we environment that you're speaking of.
Yeah, that's a fact. And in my experience, kind of coming up in the corporate world, cross-functional um, connections are really where customer experience is made or not.
Yeah.
It's when there's a dependency on another person or another group to fulfill something that's been requested, or anytime there's a handoff of any type of widget or person in any given process, there's an opportunity for breakdown.
Yeah.
The truth is, we all want to add value. We all
Hmm.
want to come to work and add value. Now, there are exceptions, and people are at different points in their willingness to contribute to that value. But I dumb it down like this, Sean. It's as simple as ABC. Everybody wants to add value, that's the A, but we all want to be valued. That's the B. So when you show up and you deliver an honest day's work or an honest month's work and you've given your all, we want to be recognized for that. It's not always money. There are other ways to show your appreciation for someone on your team, but we have to show that person is valued more than just a means to an end. And then the C, where I think the leader's obligation is really on display is to connect that value.
Yeah.
Connect the value that the team member has brought. Connect it to something bigger. Connect it to an experience that the end user has because of the work that they've done. Connect it to, hey, you knocked this presentation out of the park and it's going to put you in a position to take on more, do more, maybe get promoted. Maybe it's going to put you in a position to take a different job outside of this organization. It's a
Yeah.
stepping stone for you. So when we connect that value, we've created this environment where people do bring their best selves to work. They're not so much worried about trying to look and sound smart and be something that they're not. They're actually focused on that bigger thing. And without collaboration, none of this happens. And it's not just collaboration from one functional area to another, it's collaboration from employee and team leader. It's a collaboration among different leaders inside the organization. It's a cliche, but I've found a lot of cliches exist because they're true. We
Hmm.
can just accomplish so much more as a group with our collective intelligence and collective experiences and our collective drive than any one person can, certainly on a sustainable basis.
So I agree 100%. And I feel privileged to have this conversation live that's going to be out there for as long as the internet's around, that you and I are doing this, because
Mm,
this is part of my learning and experiential process, is having conversations with people like you, which is why I purposely titled the show Dare to Be Great, Dare to Be You, because there is an element of courage and risk of ego and pride in making some of these shifts and moving out of the proverbial total cliche word comfort zone. But the comfort zone is there, whatever we happen to put on it as a label. It's basically pushing the limits a little bit and being willing and open and curious to step outside of the proverbial bubble. And,
mhm.
you know, looking back, I'm sure have you read a bunch of the different management books? I would imagine you
Oh
have,
yeah, I'm a leadership nerd. Yeah, always have been.
everything from Maxwell to Patrick Lencioni's, and Lencioni's book, his bestseller, of The Five Dysfunctions of a Team. And then I forget who wrote it, but Creativity Inc. about Pixar is an organizational philosophy. And I want to
It's a good
bring
one.
that in here, not to name drop a book, but what Ed Catmull and John Lasseter and the rest of the crew did to try and do what you're talking about from a major animated motion picture standpoint, changed the dynamic of an industry.
Mhm.
So what you're talking about on the small micro level with employees, we don't always get to see that output until maybe two, three, four, five, even 10 years down the road. But
Right.
the stirring the pot here to change, that's why I have this, backdrop here, is the water, the San Francisco Bay,
Love it.
because it reminds me that nothing stays stagnant. Everything's always changing. And if you want to get out from the bay, you got to go under the bridge and get out into the open ocean. So
Mm.
that's what we're talking about here.
Right. Yeah.
What are the 10 W's?
So, thank you for the opportunity to share. The 10 W's are, they were created as kind of guiding principles inside of the workplace. And now I cannot share them without asking for one small favor for anyone for anyone listening on the other side of this conversation. That
Absolutely.
is, as I walk through them, try to take off the workplace hat and ask yourself, do these standards, and they're observable behavioral standards, because a principle really is a fundamental truth by definition. It's a
Mhm.
fundamental truth for a system of reasoning or a chain of reasoning. And the challenge or favor I'm asking is, if by chance any one or all 10 of these principles have a place in your personal life, would you be better off? Would you be better off if you held yourself to these types of standards and you let your friends and your family and your loved ones know it? Or wouldn't you? And I know
Yeah.
the answer because they have made their way into my personal life in ways that I never anticipated. And that's the unknown or the unexpected byproduct of this work for me. And so the 10 We's start very simply. And by the way, I'm the first to say that they are incredibly simple, but simple does not mean easy. And you
Mhm.
mentioned a word earlier that often stands in the way of people making real progress on this front, and that's ego. And
Yeah.
it does require a bit of vulnerability for the leader to set aside that ego and their desire to be seen as this omniscient, all-knowing person.
Yeah.
We've got to put ourselves on the same level playing field as everyone else. And we number one is just that simple. It's we do the right thing always. And I never leave out that one word second sentence. And we can disagree on what the right thing is, but we will never approach a scenario or an opportunity with anything other than the right thing in mind. And if I'm going to be seen as someone who's committed to doing the right thing, I've got to roll straight into we number two. It's we lead by example.
Hmm.
And that sounds very cliche, but the question is not, am I leading by example? The question is, am I leading by an example that I would be proud to see replicated? How does my team behave when I'm not in the room? How are we treating one another when the boss is not around? And leading by example is not just reserved for like on stage or leading a staff meeting. It's when you walk down the hallway and you see someone come in your direction, you toss them a smile and say hello, good to see you. Because whatever you model, that's getting played out. So if you're down buried in your phone, the next person is probably going to be buried in their phone because they see that's the message that you're sending, and that's where you're placing your importance at that moment. I think the best sign of someone leading by example is we number three. We say what we're going to do, and then we do it. It's really that simple. And it's an observable behavior where so many of us have been disappointed that either a company let us down because they didn't make good on their commitment, or inside the workplace where you're waiting on something from someone to take it somewhere else, or whatever that dependency is. We don't always keep that same level of commitment to one another behind the curtains. And I think all high performing organizations, they keep their commitments to one another. Boss to employee, just as important as employee to customer. I say the employee, the team that you lead, they are your customers. Um, and to execute on my commitments, I got to take action. And that's we number four. We take action. And taking action and making a mistake is completely okay, but we're not going to turn a cheek to something that's not optimal. And even just raising our hand to say, hey, boss, there's a problem over here. I don't know what the solution is, but somebody should probably look into this because it's having XYZ adverse impact. We got to take action. We can't settle for mediocrity. We can't settle for average. We have to take action. But if we want people to take action, we've got to be aware of we number five. That's we own our mistakes. No one's going to raise their hand to point out the gnarly issue in the corner or even try something new or different or innovative if they think they're going to be met with some kind of retribution if they stumble. And the only way to bring those mistakes to light is to have this commitment from one and all that we're going to own our mistakes. We're going to throw our hands up and say, I blew it, including the boss. They have to own their own mistakes. I don't think people are judged by their mistakes, believe it or not. I think we judge others by how well and how quickly we remedy the mistake and if it happens again. I think mistakes are part of life, but we just got to own them or else we'll never get better. When we own our mistakes, it's incumbent to make sure that we recognize we're tough on the issue, not on the person. And that's we number seven. Sorry, we number six. And that's we pick each other up. All of us bring baggage to work. We all have things going on outside of work. It's rare that we show up at 100% every single day. And we can't rely on one person, the boss, to pick everybody else up every single day, although I think it's an obligation. But we've got to be in a place where when someone's struggling, we recognize it. Hey, you blew that. You raised your hand to own that mistake and you blew it. Well, I'm here to help. What can I do? That's the kind of thing we got to have inside of each of our organizations across all levels, regardless of title. We number seven is really tough for some companies to get behind, and it's usually the bigger companies that struggle with it. And that's we measure ourselves by outcomes, not activity. That's we number seven. Look, man, at the end of the day, the real world cares about outcomes. They don't care about how busy you are to deliver those outcomes. The example I like to use is I'm always happy when my Uber driver puts gas in the car before they pick me up, but I didn't pay for that activity. It's an important activity, and where this is really kind of where it becomes a real plague inside of an organization is found in the number of meetings that we have. It's, we have a meeting to plan for a meeting, and then we have a meeting to debrief from the meeting. And if there's some scope creep inside of one of these meetings, you know what we do, Sean? Well, we'll just schedule another meeting. And before you know
Sorry,
it, we're not
laughing.
getting
I've
real
been there,
work done
done
because we're
that.
sitting in these meetings and nothing is moving forward. We're not moving the ball. We're making ourselves feel good because we think we're busy, but our customers don't care about that. As a matter of fact, I think if our customers knew how much time we spent in meetings instead of solving their problem, we'd hear about it. My favorite of all the 10 we's is we number 8, and it's we challenge each other. And there's a one-word second sentence for this one as well. It's diplomatically. Challenges must be grounded in data or experience. They always have to come with some type of support. They can't just be, I feel this way, or it's my opinion. Opinions matter, but when we're trying to drive change, we want to create this culture of excellence, our challenges must be observed, and that's data, and they must have backing, and that's usually experience if someone's lived a similar scenario, either within our team or outside. But we number 8 without we number 9 is a recipe for chaos. We number 9 is we embrace challenge. And that's from top to bottom, beginning to end. If it's an external threat, we're going to embrace that challenge. If it's a threat from within, maybe we've got some tough cuts in front of us, or we've got some pricing challenges, whatever the scenario is. We're going to give ourselves a little bit of grace when a bad thing comes our direction. We're going to, we'll take a few minutes to say, man, this sucks. And we're going to talk about it openly. We're not going to hide behind it or hide from it. And then we're going to lock arms, and we're going to be galvanized by it, because that's what a team does, is they're galvanized by problems. They recognize on the other side of this problem is opportunity, and we're going to be better off for it. And the more we embrace the challenges, the easier the challenges become. And then the last of the 10 We's is I was purposeful to leave it as number 10 because I think if it were earlier in the list, it'd be a recipe for unhappiness and uneasiness. And that's we obsess over details. In nearly every industry, Sean, you know this, the difference between company A and company B is found in the details. If you want to
Hmm.
be excellent, we've got to obsess over those details. We cannot send something out into the public domain that's haphazard. If it's our brand, whether it's the company's brand, we have to take care of that. And if it's our personal brand, and that's behind the curtains, how I lead, what's it like to be led by me? Those types of questions have to be answered. But we're going to obsess over those details because that's what's going to separate us from the person down the street and the company down the street. That's the 10 We's.
And I love it. And like you said, they are super simple. When I did 10 seconds of baldness, it took 7 years to finally fine tune down to
Mm.
a 5-step process. And I'm like, just like that, it's like, okay, these are obvious, but the unique combination of how you do that as an integrative system is what separates, in my opinion, of having worked with companies that stand behind what they do and honor and respect their employees and basically put their money where their mouth is.
Right.
To just be blunt, those types of organizations are practicing the 10 We's
Mhm.
because it's not just all about what we are going to get. And this you speak to this from an internal perspective, from an organizational mindset. There's another element that I would encourage you to look at if you haven't already is how does this interact with the outside? And it does. But
Oh yeah.
that's the missing link. And that's kind of where I come in with this, the gap mindset coaching part is how do you balance this? Because it's not just in a silo. We already talked about that with the various departments, but organizationally, leadership wise, these 10 We's are imperative, not just for the leaders, like you already said at the outset before you jumped in here, but applicable to other areas of our life.
Amen.
And there's one on here that there's two on here. It's similar to the four agreements with Miguel Ruiz about being impeccable with your word, which is the essence of what I hear you saying here.
Mhm.
But one thing, actually, let me ask you this. What is the hardest one that you've encountered in your work with a lot of different people in organizations and getting on CSNBC and all these big names that comes up most frequently as a
Wi-
challenge?
without question, it's we number 8. We challenge each other.
Okay.
And I mentioned this, but I'll go a little bit deeper. It is this notion that to be a boss, to be an impactful leader inside of an organization, you have to have all the right answers. You have to be the smartest and loudest voice in the room. But we challenge each other is really about doing away with these hierarchies and having a level playing field where if you have a challenge that's grounded in data or experience, you're not allowed to bring it up. You're obligated to bring it up. And that doesn't matter. It doesn't matter to whom that challenge is directed, but we need challenges from clearly from the boss to the team, but the team to the boss is just as important because as I think you intimated this earlier, those actually doing the work are closest to the work and they usually have the best track on innovation and change. And then we've
Yeah.
got to have the same environment for peer to peer. It's like if we're going to be a team and a member of the team is not pulling their weight or not giving their level best, just kind of phoning it in, I think it's an obligation of other team members to say, is everything okay? Right? We
Yeah.
challenge each other and we recognize that you're not contributing at the same level or expertise or the optimal outcomes that we're used to seeing from you. Like I'm going to challenge that. Is everything okay? I want to challenge you to make sure everything's fine. And that's where we pick each other up as connected by a mile. It's the leader's inability to set aside their need to be right and ego that stands in the way of the adoption of we number 8. But when they do, when we set aside our need to be the most articulate, the have all the answers, and we stop answering everything and start asking more questions, boy, you see people flower. They really develop because they recognize their voice matters.
So I don't want to interject my own personal opinions and philosophies in here, but I want yours because you're on the front lines. Why do you think that is? From your experience and even as a leader, why is it? What's driving that behavior?
Ego, ego. It's hard to be challenged if you feel as if you are in this position of authority because you do have the best ideas. You do have Listen, my favorite example of this is, and you know this, the higher you ascend in any organization or industry, the funnier your jokes become. And the more people want to
The
spend
jokes
time with
at you
you.
or the jokes? I'm
The
sorry.
jokes don't get funnier, but the audience wants you to think they're funnier.
Gotcha.
And that's the irony. It's is we put our leaders on this pedestal and we expect perfection from them, and then they tend to run with that. And what happens is this level of inauthentic connection where no trust is found. And trust is a foundational requirement for a high performing team. So if they see the boss behaving in ways that they know is inauthentic, they're covering up their weaknesses. They don't share their blind sides. They're not transparent when they can and should be. Well, of course I'm not going to trust that person, and I'm not going to give I'm not going to give the same. I'm not going to be vulnerable and open and transparent with you if you're not that way with me. It's no different than any other relationship in our life.
Which ties to what I was going to say, and I'm thank you for that because I wanted to hear it from you with because I my biggest challenge is I have a tendency to assume things, and we all know what that does. It's old
Mhm.
cliche, but it's sometimes better to ask because when you hearing you say that, we've all been there, we've all experienced it. And as employees or as leaders, there's this tension that happens, at least that I've experienced, even being leaders of nonprofit boards and such, where people don't always want to speak up because they're afraid. They've been conditioned to this environment that if they speak up or they're wrong, that they're going to be reprimanded or whatever. And that goes back to the challenging things here diplomatically, but it isn't about pointing fingers, if I hear you correctly. And on the flip side, from a leader's perspective, it's being open and vulnerable enough to say whatever it was, number four, where it was willing to admit when you make a mistake or something along that.
That's right.
Yeah, number five. Um, that is in direct conflict with somebody who is trying to protect the fact that they know it all. They don't
Hmm.
want to be seen as inadequate. And by not being vulnerable enough to say, hey, I screwed up, that implodes, right?
Amen.
And
Amen. I call it
I'm
the
going to
leadership
speak into
gap.
some spiritual stuff here for a second because I hear the undertones here, but I get it. I've lived it and breathed it for 40 years, and I
Yeah.
understand the dynamics of this, if that's what the root is here. And it's not about that, but it's
Well,
incredibly important.
and I don't think it's unique. I think we've all been in that environment at least once in our careers, and even outside of the workplace, where we have people that just have to be right and they're not open to any other way of thinking. We see it so much, of course, in social media and politics today, which is, probably a different conversation for a different time. But ultimately, the best ideas will never see the light of day if we only give one person the microphone.
Yeah.
And when people feel as if they're in a safe place to raise concerns, also raise ideas for solutions and innovation, and that their voice is going to be heard, even if we don't travel down the path that they're recommending every single time, just knowing that your voice is heard does not encourage you to not offer suggestions next time.
Yeah.
So we just got to have this open dialogue and set aside our ego and this need to be right and this need to be the one that gives the direction and just have a collaborative approach to everything that we do. As it turns out, we're all wired to want to contribute. We're tribal by nature, and the less opportunity that we're given to express that kind of biology, then the more likely we are to shut down and ultimately leave.
And you're right. You hit it on the head. And anybody who's in a leadership position has probably read some of the books out there, but they spin it a whole bunch of different ways and get all scientific. But the bottom line is human nature
Hmm.
is fight or flight in protecting, and that's what the ego's role is to do, is to protect us and keep us safe. But my understanding of the ego is yes, that's true, but when it starts impeding our ability to connect, that everybody says we want to connect, that is the root cause of the problem. And I'm so appreciative that you called it out that the number one thing is that because I assumed it, but you just validated it for me. And I don't need to have that like, oh yeah, I was right. Well, but bringing it back to me, I have to be very mindful of myself and my tendency to bowl over people when I do know the right answers because I've done something for the longest time. And I have to have that grace and willingness
Yeah.
to hear other options of ways that it might be done differently or even better. And that's a whole different conversation. I'll have you back on the show because I want to explore that deeper, Kyle. I think as we wrap up here, what I'd like to do, if you're willing, is just walk the audience, the listening and viewing audience, through what this might look like from your perspective as an outside coach or consultant walking in here, so you can just diagnose it. I mean, use me if you want as a prospective client, if you want a role play or whatever, but just to give people a framework of how this might play out so that they might be able to take some snippets from here, call out onto you and say, hey, Kyle, we really want you to come in here and it's a mess. We need some help type of thing.
Yeah. Well, the first step is to identify your standards. And although my publisher hates when I say this, but it is the truth. I don't care if it's the 10 We's. I don't care if you create your own. The point is we've got to have a goalpost or a goal line. We've got
There
to
you
have
go.
standards, observable behavioral standards that we lean into and lean against, and that are called out in ways that are not specific to the person, but to the behavior or lack of it. Most companies have these really sexy values on a wall: integrity, collaboration, responsibility, and they're all beautiful aspirational words, but they don't compel anybody to work any harder behind the curtains.
Right.
So it's our job as leaders to connect those values, the things that the company's known for, or at least that we want the company to be known for, to the team that's actually delivering on that mission. And how do we do that? Well, we've got to define our expectations. We can't just say show up and act with integrity. As much as we'd like to think that that's a doable thing, your version of integrity could be different than my version of integrity, depending on the given scenario. So when we're able to establish our principles, our kind of our our expectations of behavior for one and all, not just you as the team, but me as a leader as well. And then be open and transparent and vulnerable enough to recognize when you don't live up to them. Because we shouldn't beat around the bush. If you want to drive change inside of an organization, it really does have to start with the leaders. Now, that doesn't mean there aren't pockets of high functioning areas inside of organizations that have bad leaders. But if you're really trying to drive change, and to answer your question directly, if someone's listening or watching and they're interested in this better way, it has to start with you. And you have to understand that your level of effort, it has to go up, because you're going to focus on things that you may not have spent a lot of time on before. Now,
Yeah.
I will tell you, the long road ahead is going to challenge your commitment. And the worst thing anyone can do is kind of profess this massive change, or they're on a stump talking about how we're going to be this we-oriented organization, but at the first time of adversity, you sink back into your old ways. The whole thing's dead on arrival.
Yeah.
The bottom line here is nobody cares what you say. They care in what you do. They care about your actions. And if your actions are aligned with your words, and if your words are these 10 principles, and this is how I'm going to lead, and how I'm going to behave, and how I'm going to show you that I'm modeling these principles, people are watching. They're watching to see how you behave anyway. Now they're watching to see if your actions are aligned with your words. And the moment that those actions and words start to align more than they don't, fellowship will ensue. But the worst thing you can do is just show up and say you read a book or you watched or listened to a podcast and you have this new and better way. If you're not truly committed to it, and the commitment doesn't just happen on day one, Sean, it happens every day. And a lot of days it needs to happen every interaction, because every time that you interact with someone, it's an opportunity to prove your commitment to your own principles.
I agree 100%. And, even though I'm not in a leadership level in my
Oh,
current
sure you are.
organization, I have to represent the company and be mindful of that when I'm out there sitting across the table from CEOs and business owners of companies of all size in my day job. And now, as I'm expanding into working with authors, there's this trust. You talked about it. The trust is what happens. And the only way that I can build trust that I know of, and it's how I was raised, and it's kind of how I've always been for the most part, except when I was BSing myself, and I still do that on a daily
Mm,
basis,
mhm,
is to be a person of integrity and to not overpromise and underdeliver, but to show up as myself and to have it's taken years of practice to have the diplomacy to take what I want out of this conversation and leave it over here. That's stepping out of the ego for a second from a
mhm,
sales perspective and even a leadership, and to lean in. And the simplest, most obvious thing is to be empathetic and say, "Hey, what's going on with your business? What's going on with?" And this is at any level. What's
mhm.
going on with you? and to shut the F up and listen.
That's right.
And that's the part that most of us, including me, still have a hard time to do because we talked about ego. As a salesperson, there's an old sales saying that says, don't show up and throw up. People don't want to hear that. They
Yeah.
want to hear what you can do for them and
Right.
us included. So what you're talking about here is it's so simple, Kyle. And sadly, I hope you agree. Sadly, I don't think it's being modeled as much as it potentially could be, which is where I'm going to tee up this for you right here, right now, is give you an opportunity to talk to some people out there, not as a nickel pitch. I want you to be sincere, but tell them what you do in working and who you want to work with. It's your opportunity to give a nickel pitch for, a minute or two.
Yeah, thank you, Sean. It's I have to say this chapter of my career certainly surprised me. When I wrote my first book, I had this goal of selling 1,000 copies. I figured I knew enough people who knew enough people that would be charitable enough to buy my book, and we just crossed the 50,000 copy threshold a couple of months ago.
Congratulations. That's huge.
Thank you. It's mind blowing to me. But I don't share those. I don't share those out of vanity. I share those because it's telling me exactly what you just. It's confirming exactly what you just mentioned. Is that this approach to leadership is void in a lot of environments. So the book has kind of made its way throughout the world. It's been sold in more countries than I'm even aware of now. And my work behind that is to help organizations create an environment. I call it a culture of excellence. Create an environment where people really can show up, be their authentic selves in pursuit of something bigger than what the organization is chasing. Now we got to deliver on organizational goals, but I want to be a part of a team that recognizes that you may be here for a year, you may be here for 10 years, but regardless of your stint here with us, it's my opportunity and my obligation to help move you in the next direction, whatever that is, promotion, outside, whatever it is. And I do that via a number of ways. We have a workbook, we have an online course, a master class that's out there. I do a lot of public speaking, so I'm on stage at organizations and conferences 3, 4
Mhm.
times a month. And then usually out of those, not usually, but a lot of times out of those gigs becomes an opportunity to partner with leaders inside of the organization or leadership teams more broadly. Like, for example, I'm going to a physician's practice later this week to do a keynote followed by a 2 hour workshop with their most senior leaders to help them like carry the momentum from the keynote, and that's the exposure of the 10 we's and begin with we into actual application for them so they can start to feel it throughout the organization rather than just waiting and hoping kind of
Yeah.
organically that the stuff happens. We do a lot of that.
I love it. And it's a simple model. I hear the humility in your voice and in this conversation and your transparency too, just about, you were running at a young man, you had a ton of responsibility for a lot of people and those decisions, I would imagine, impacted a lot of people in a positive way or could impact people in a positive way, depending on whatever state you were in at that time. And it reminds me of I love basketball. Do you like sports at all?
Big time.
Yeah. I've been a basketball fan for almost all my life. I fell in love with it. I'm a Bay Area native, so I just love the Golden State Warriors, not just because of Steph Curry, but I pay attention to what the best coaches do in the
Mhm.
sporting environment, whether it's George Seifert, Bill Walsh, Joe Montana, all of the Bay Area greats, because that's where I live. And there's tons of others that are out there. I mean, Tom Landry with the Cowboys, even though I can't stand him, was a phenomenal leader of a team for a lot of the stuff that you're talking about. And Mike Krzyzewski also in terms of how they bring the culture together. I'm going to have on the show soon a gentleman that I went to high school with by the name of Steve Lavin, who coached at UCLA was along with Wooden. He contributed a substantial portion to the book that I wrote, 10 Seconds of Boldness. The only reason I'm bringing this up is for the folks out there, wherever they're at, Kyle, there's an opportunity here to connect with me or you in particular from an organizational standpoint to not just give lip service to what it is that you put out there. You've already sold 50,000 books, but to lean in and Folks, I want you to get a hold of Kyle because if I hear it correctly, you've got an opportunity to make a shift and change the alignment with the next generation that's quite frankly sick and tired of the old school. I was sick and tired of it as the end of the baby boomer coming in with the old school 70s and 80s style management. I couldn't stand it. And that shift is happening right now. And I'm going to give you a free plug. If you want to figure out how to make that shift and be able to survive the next 10 to 20 or 30 years in your organization when the biggest baby boom in the country or the world happens, you need to get on board. So how do they get a hold of you?
Well, thank you again for the opportunity, man. So my website is kylemcdowellinc.com, and I'm on all social media platforms, LinkedIn, Instagram, everywhere, with the same handle, Kyle McDowell Inc.
Kyle, do you have any other questions or anything you want to add to this? Because
No,
I
man, you're
tried to
doing
tee
no
you up as a
questions. Just a
pitch
parting
man.
comment is that you're doing really, really, really important work, and I feel like it's an honor to be a part of it and share my message on your platform. So thank you.
I appreciate you coming on. I mean, for those out there who aren't yet ready to dare to be great or totally step into who you were created to be, this is me to you, and I hope you agree, Kyle. There's an opportunity that each and every one of us has, and those opportunities come along in our lifetime. And when those opportunities come along, we have a choice to make. We can choose to go what we feel is the right way or what might not be the right way. But every one of those opportunities that come our way, whether they're in leadership, they're in service, as a parent, as a friend, as a student, whatever it is, it's not about forcing integrity with dogma and all that. It's about being a better human and trusting that the decisions you make are going to be okay. And the reason you're going to be okay is if you listen to Joe Montana and George Seifert, he wanted to fail more. You know why he wanted to fail more? Because he learned that much faster. So what you're talking about is creating this culture where it's safe. And some cultures, it's okay and encouraged to make mistakes because that's the opportunity where we can go truly from me to we if it's safe for people to make mistakes and still be accountable and make corrections, correct?
Well said. Beautifully said.
All right, buddy. Hey, folks, this has been Dare to Be Great, Dare to Be You. I've been visiting for the last 45, 50 minutes with Kyle McDowell, who is a best-selling author of the book. Uh, Give me the title again. I don't have it in front of me.
Begin with we. 10 principles for building and sustaining a culture of excellence.
And if you want to be excellent or you want to dare to be great, follow him, follow me, go help somebody else. Because at the end of the day, the real true test of greatness is not how much we get for ourselves. It's what we do and leave behind for the next person. Kyle, thanks for being my guest today. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Sean.
Until next time, folks, if you like the show, follow it, share it. It's gaining traction and it's just a passion project. And now it's becoming much bigger. And I'm so grateful for everybody who's tuning in. Until next time, this has been Dare to Be Great, Dare to Be You. I'm your host, Sean Langwell.